How do you compare to Canada's best Catan players? This placement puzzle will give you a chance to put your placement skills up against the national champions. We'll also see what the end result of those placements was, here on Legendary Tactics. Of all of the decisions in Catan, which one do you think is the most important? Most would argue that it's the initial placement. Really, can you think of any other individual decision that has so much impact on the outcome of the game? In the comments, let me know what percentage you would assign to the value of initial placements. I'm going to venture to say it's 60% of the game. If you rush this decision, you'll end up letting your opponents outmaneuver you from the outset. Today, you get to match your skills up against Canada's best players in 2020. So, here's the first placement puzzle. Now, when you're deciding where to place, it's key that you consider a number of factors. Number one, what probabilities are there for each resource? I think this is of primary concern to most people. Number two, you're looking at the ore and brick, likely because they're slightly more rare, and you often need to jump on those a little bit quicker. Number three, which resources give close access to the coordinating kind of port? Number four, as a guideline, you're ideally looking for a combination of 11 plus pips on your first placement. Sometimes you only get 10. Number five, having access to each type of resource is important, though it's still possible to win without all of them. Ore and wheat lead to city building, which then amplifies your overall production. So those are often very important. Number six, I personally think that being the second player to place settlements is the ideal spot, and the data supports this claim. You'll see in this game that the person who won the draw and got to decide where they chose decided to go second. That's the yellow player. At the end of the video, I'll share with you the stats on these placements. So let's get started. I'm going to give you 10 seconds between each placement here before I reveal where these top-ranked Canadians played. If you need more time, feel free to pause the video. So red is placing first, and they've chosen the 6 ore, 3 sheep, 10 wheat, and it's also near a port. This is a total of 10 pips. I think the real attraction here for red is the 6 ore. Ore is absolutely essential at the higher levels. One road leads to a 3-to-1 port, and you now have 10 more seconds before placing for yellow. The yellow player takes the 4 sheep, 5 wheat, and 10 wood. That's also 10 pips. They're heading for the 3-to-1 port, and it seems like their strategy is aiming for resource production, and they did a decent pick there. 10 more seconds. The blue player goes for the 5 ore, which is clearly the main attraction. 9 wheat and 12 wood. That's 9 pips. I was looking hard at that 6 sheep there for the better resource production, but this player clearly went for wheat. I'll be really curious to see how blue finishes, because to me that seems like a mistake. 10 more seconds before we show you the final player. As the 4th player, it can be very painful watching all the other great spots disappear on the board. But here the white player decides to take the 3 ore, the 6 sheep, and the 11 brick. That's 9 pips. Overall, this wasn't a terrible placement. Ore was disappearing quickly, so we see the rationale there. And once again, we're seeing the road pointed toward the ports. Let's move now to the second picks. There are a few things that players should be thinking about at this point. What resources do they still need to balance out? Number 2, where can they block their opponents? Number 3, what resources will other players need that might set up a favorable trading situation? Number 4, they also want to focus on where they're expanding to next, paying attention to where their opponents might contest them. And number 5, finally, now that you see what your opponents are doing, and maybe you have an insight into what strategy they're playing for, you need to focus on what strategy you're going for. We actually did a video on the different archetypes and the main strategies that players use. I'll put a card to that link up above at the top of the video there. If you're white, where do you put your second settlement here? You have 10 seconds. So white's second pick results in an 8 wheat, 11 brick, and 10 wood for 10 pips. Not bad. This is a strong placement this late, which gives the white player access to every resource right out of the gates. They've got quick access to a port, and a late pick white steel in the middle of the board. So noticeably, he took this placement as his second pick rather than his first, so that he would get a road right off the start from the brick and the wood. Take 10 more seconds before blue makes their play. So this one is interesting. This to me is yet another questionable take. He hasn't got any sheep production, and perhaps he's counting on the 5 sheep for his first settlement, but he goes for the 8 brick, the 4 wood, the 2 sheep, that's 9 pips, and he'll get the resources for a road. He points his road toward the ore port, which is a fairly safe play, but it tips his intention to get the 5 ore from his first placement. So as blue's opponent, I would be very seriously considering trying to block that by taking the 6 sheep and 5 ore placement. Although ideally, I would actually want one of my other opponents to be blocking that maneuver so I could get a better placement for myself. Where would you go here? Well, let's see what happens next. You have 10 seconds before yellow plays. So you probably noticed that there's lots of options here for yellow. They decide to settle on the 8 brick, 9 wheat, and they get 9 pips out of this. Now this is an interesting coastal choice here. This means that ore is going to be a real problem for this player. They haven't got any, but wheat will not. However, they are on a port, which is really great. So this player is clearly choosing higher production over balanced production. And the road is aiming for the 5 ore to fill that gap. So yellow is likely playing for an explosive early game, tons of production, and converting into that ore resource that they need. Overall, a pretty decent start. Let's take 10 more seconds before we do the final placement by red. The final placement for red here, he goes to the 5 ore and 6 sheep. That's the spot I was eyeing up because blue tipped his hand. So the problem is here, blue and red seem to be countering each other somewhat. So they're actually causing problems for each other, which might be good, especially if you're white or yellow in this case. So blue will not be happy to see that play, clearly, and red saw what was coming and decided to shut it down. So 9 pips is still pretty solid for 2 tiles as the 8th pick, but they're also hemmed in by both yellow and blue here. So that makes expansion a little bit more difficult on that side of the map. So how did you do? How did you compare to these top-ranked players? Based on these placements, who would you now predict as the winner? And before I reveal, I'll show you what the final board looked like. We'll give you 5 seconds to look at that. Okay, make your prediction. And the winner of this game was yellow. Her game focused on high production and lots of port trading, and you can see right from the outset that she was keeping to the edges. This actually was a great strategy because she stayed out of everybody's way. She didn't even try for the longest road, and she still won the game. She got the brick port, the wheat port, and the 3-to-1 port, so tons of resource conversion. She also had solid sheep, wheat, and ore production, which ended up giving her lots of development cards and eventually the biggest army. She ended the game with 3 cities and even built 2 cities in a single turn. That's pretty impressive. She had a real late game surge. It was clear from her initial placements that she saw a viable strategy right from the outset. She focused all of her play on that path, and she wasn't really challenged for it either. Second place went to white with 8 points, and you can see they had a huge road, lots of potential, and they just about took the game. Incidentally, the blue player, who made some unconventional choices in my opinion, ended third with 5 points. Red ended with a measly 3 points, so it wasn't a stellar showing considering you start the game with 2 and you can't lose victory points, but that's okay. Yellow played a strong game and they deserve the win. I told you at the start of the video that I'd share some data with you. So the data I've seen demonstrates the second place has an approximately 27 to 28% win rate. Fourth place is between 22 to 23% at higher level play. So it's not a huge statistical difference there, but every edge you can get, especially at this level of play, can really help when you're up against some strong players. So my recommendation to you is to try to go second. And I think the idea is that when you're picking fourth amongst really great players like this who know where to choose, there's going to be fewer options available to you late in the game. And conversely, if you're the first player, there's really going to be nothing left by the time you get to the 8th pick, unless it's a really rich board. So going second is ideal to get a really strong early pick, but not end up with the very worst pick. If you had fun taking the Canadian Catan challenge, or if you learned something in this video, we'd appreciate you supporting our channel by subscribing. And don't forget to develop the like button. Thanks so much for your time.